or new. And I looked at him and said two words, David Pecker. Look, I disagree a bit with some who have said they think this is a reach. Look, if in fact, it doesn't seem to me that federal campaign finance law needs to be involved in any way here. The crime is to try to essentially defraud the voters of the state of New York by trying to either help or impede the election or defeat of two or more candidates, which would be Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And Pecker is the guy. And I think what may have changed here with Alvin Bragg is maybe David Pecker was willing to come forward now and be cooperative because in the federal case, there was a lot of back and forth with Pecker about what he would do or not do. And Pecker, presumably, does not have the same infirmities that Michael Cohen would have as a witness. One, you haven't seen David Pecker anywhere. You haven't seen him on television giving any interviews or doing anything else. I haven't seen this guy for a long time. And I certainly haven't seen him making any public comments as opposed to Michael Cohen, who seems to be as addicted as his former boss is to getting in front of a TV camera. So my guess as to what's going on here is that the single most important witness, as was said earlier by Pierre, you don't have to prove these 34 falsification counts. They're not going to be difficult to prove. And Cohen will probably have the most to do with that. And I don't think it'll be hard to prove. The key is going to be proving the underlying crime that elevates it to a felony. And I think there is going to be one most important witness, and that's going to be David Pecker.
We have pulled the transcript. We'll give you complete credit for having predicted some of this on Sunday morning. Our thanks to you, Governor Christie. Thank you very much. And so you heard Chris Christie there, former prosecutor himself, Dan and Kate, talking about, there's been this discussion about the violation of campaign finance law or that he's saying that perhaps that discussion needs to be put aside and that we need to really be focusing on David Pecker here and a scheme. And he says, and that's what the DA is now trying to lay out.
So I think that there are two separate issues here, right? One is the technicalities of the law, and the other is prosecutorial discretion. The technicalities of the law are exactly what Chris Christie was talking about there, which is, does this fit into the category of a violation of the law? Can you prove it? Can you prove that Donald Trump knew about it? And then with regard to the rising it to a felony, that's where Pecker becomes really important, because he will come forward, presumably, and testify. And it says here, actually, in the statement of facts, Section 23 says the defendant thanked the AMI CEO for handling the stories of the doorman and woman one and invited the AMI CEO to the inauguration. In the summer of 2017, the defendant invited the AMI CEO to the White House for a dinner to thank him for his help during the campaign. Where do you think they're getting that from? They're getting it from David Pecker.
David Pecker.
Is telling them that.
We're going to hear from the DA in a moment, but right now, all eyes on Donald Trump walking up the stairwell to his plane. He will fly back to Mar-a-Lago. He's expected to address reporters in Mar-a-Lago tonight with some sort of a statement, though unclear how much of that will change now given what's played out here before us. It'd be fascinating, of course, obviously, to be on that plane for this 2 to 3 hour flight back down to Mar-a-Lago, John. But the president will no doubt be watching coverage and reacting to the indictment that he only saw moments before he entered that courtroom.
No doubt about it. And there's another line of narrative in this statement of facts, and it regards the pressure that Donald Trump was putting on Michael Cohen not to tell the truth. And it describes two of Donald Trump's lawyers in communication with Michael Cohen and promising to be a back channel with the president. And some of this stuff is really quite interesting. First of all, they point out that Donald Trump had actually tweeted after Michael Cohen's apartment was searched. Most people will flip if the government lets them out of trouble, even if it means lying or making up stories. I don't see Michael Cohen doing that. But then it describes Cohen being approached by lawyer C is the way it's defined, which is defined as one of the defendant's lawyers, as offering a back channel of communication with the defendant, with Donald Trump, and saying this could not be a better situation for the president or for you. I spoke with another Trump lawyer, very, very positive. You are loved. Sleep well tonight. You have friends in high places. What this sounds to me like is the suggestion that Michael Cohen was going to be protected by Donald Trump. And what I actually asked Trump about the day after his Michael Cohen's home was raided was, are you considering a pardon for Michael Cohen? And I'll never forget the reaction, because Trump glared at me, looked at me and said, that's a stupid question. Stupid question. And it really got to him. This implication here, it seems to me, is that through these intermediaries, Michael Cohen was being assured that the president was going to take care of him as long as he didn't testify against him. How do you take care of him? It's a pardon.
Question that you asked. You know, I think there's another question out there too, and that is whether or not the previous Manhattan DA had the cooperation, the full cooperation of David Pecker, the way Alvin Bragg seems to. He seems to be a crucial part of this indictment, and I think that's going to be a central question for.
But he's not unassailable either. Remember, he ran a really seedy publication for a long time that did a lot of dirty work, right? So let's not start treating David Pecker as if he's going to be some witness that's going to be come in with totally clean hands, et cetera.
Well,
right?
I'm certainly not elevating him and putting him on a pedestal. What I'm asking, though, is because there have been questions about why the other DA didn't move forward and why Alvin Bragg did. I wonder if this will be part of the answer moving forward. It's just a question that's out there.
I think that's right. I think look, Chris Christie made that point, and it strikes me as being absolutely, potentially true. We don't know exactly what the difference is between what he was willing to do before and what he's willing to do now.
And just one little development also. In 2021, the National Enquirer's parent company paid an almost $200,000 Federal Election Commission fine specifically regarding the Karen McDougal payments. So I'm not sure how exactly the timing works out, but this is something the Federal Election Commission did look at, and there was an actual settlement reached. So other investigators to the kind of, well, why haven't the feds looked at this? Actually, as to one aspect of the scheme, the feds did take a look, and the FEC actually imposed a civil penalty.
Okay. And David, to pick up on what Dan was saying, this reference to President Trump having a conversation with Pecker about his gratefulness for catching and killing these stories. Again, we don't know the specifics. We don't yet know what Pecker would say in court. We don't know those details. But that's going to be critical, is how detailed is that information? We don't know what his credibility will be, but there is this notion pointed to in this statement of facts that the president was aware of what was done, that's the suggestion, and was happy about it having been done. So we need to dig into that. Pecker will be a person that everyone wants to try to interview right now. We need to know the answer to those questions before we can make some final assessments.
And as we look at that live picture of the plane, he hasn't taken off yet, the former president, to go back to Mar-a-Lago. But John, I'd be fascinated to know how angry perhaps the former president is to have learned the level to which it appears David Pecker has cooperated with the DA and with prosecutors here.
Yeah, Donald Trump hasn't always been good to understate things at being loyal to those that have been loyal to him, but he has demanded loyalty. And here you have two people who are extremely close to him. His fixer, Michael Cohen, his good friend, David Pecker. And we know Michael Cohen turned on him, 5 years ago. But now we're learning that David Pecker, somebody he did consider a friend, has turned on him. And he will be seething in anger at that. Again, this is somebody that isn't always so good at conveying loyalty to others, but he demands it.
In return, no question about that. And in fact, we're seeing that another new chapter of that in tracking the Republicans who are supporting him right now. Rachel Scott has reported that not only is he calling for support, but then keeping track of those who are with him and those who are not, particularly with him ahead in the polls and growing, at least right now in these last couple of days. I want to bring in Olivia Rubin again, the reporter who was inside that courtroom, because this was something that we had all talked about here at the desk, which is the political calculation, because there's this race for the White House playing out right now. And Olivia, both sides got a chance to say when ideally this trial would begin if it goes to trial, and there were two different dates thrown out.
Absolutely. They in a way got right down to business, with the prosecutor telling the judge that they were eyeing a January 2024 trial date. Of course, that's right in the middle of that election year. Trump's attorney got up. Todd Blanche, he said that felt aggressive to him. They said maybe something more towards the spring, obviously trying to push it back a little bit there, with the judge ultimately weighing in. He did not pick a date or anything of the sort, but he said, I would like to move this ahead.
But the defense actually pushing it to the spring, or suggesting at least, which gets it even closer to Election Day.
Exactly, that's right. And again, the judge not weighing in on dates. Of course, he did set that date for December, just at the end of this year, for Trump to potentially have to come back to Manhattan, come back to court. The attorneys will be there. The question is, will Trump be there? But this does not seem like something that's going away or something that Trump himself will not have to be dealing with.
Really interesting information coming in from Olivia Rubin. Again, this timetable is not set in stone, not even close, but there were some dates thrown out in court. The judge suggesting that both sides would have to return the end of this year, but that perhaps if this goes to trial, the prosecution suggesting January of 24, obviously the beginning of this coming year. Less than a year away, January 24, right in the height of a presidential campaign. The defense team reacting, saying, let's push that back a little bit to spring of 24. And we all know that in November of 24 is going to be, election night in America. So this is something that will play out right in the middle of a presidential campaign. You're looking live right now at the podium where it's believed the Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, who has a number of questions to answer. Dan Abrams has a number of them for him. And so do the reporters in that room about the theory behind this indictment, why now, why this indictment, and how strong he believes this scheme that he has laid out in this indictment. That one of the things that Pierre Thomas pointed out right away is that it's not just Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen, the names that you've heard reported over and over again. Also central figures in this indictment, it would appear, and we'll let the Manhattan DA speak for himself, but it would appear David Pecker, who owned the National Enquirer, has played a significant role in this indictment put together by the DA and the allegation that there was this scheme, and we've reported on this before, to catch and kill stories that were considered to be harmful, if you will, to a presidential candidate, particularly some of these stories that were playing out in the months and leading up to that crucial election day of 2016, John.
Absolutely, and I have to come back to this motion about the trial date. January 16th is the New Hampshire primary. And the prosecution is asking for a start date in January for the trial. The Trump team responding with the spring. Well, the spring, we're talking Super Tuesday. We're talking the conclusion or close to the conclusion of the Republican primary process. No matter how you look at this, this plays out right in the middle of the campaign.
And it'll likely be pushed even beyond that. I mean, these are just the initial discussions about a trial date, and those things often get pushed back once motions start, et cetera. And again, as we talked about before, it's in the hands of the defendant, really, as to how much they want to delay it.
Yeah, we have all these protections for criminal defendants, and rightly so. So actually, prosecutors might want to move this along quickly, but it's not entirely in their control. So if the Trump team wants to delay it, you can't delay this forever like a civil case, but you have significant control over the timeline. And if they want to push it into the spring for whatever political reasons, I think that they're going to be able to do that to a degree, not indefinitely, but to a degree.
Well, we've been on the air now for several hours, and Kate, both you and Dan Abrams have pointed out repeatedly that the defense team will be in control of this timeline in large part. Let's listen to Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here today. Earlier this afternoon, Donald Trump was arraigned on a New York Supreme Court indictment returned by a Manhattan grand jury on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. Under New York state law, it is a felony to falsify business records with intent to defraud and an intent to conceal another crime. That is exactly what this case is about. 34 false statements made to cover up other crimes. These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are. We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct. The defendant repeatedly made false statements on New York business records. He also caused others to make false statements. The defendant claimed that he was paying Michael Cohen for legal services performed in 2017. This simply was not true. And it was a false statement that the defendant made month after month in 2017. April, May, June, and so on through the rest of the year. For 9 straight months, the defendant held documents in his hand containing this key lie, that he was paying Michael Cohen for legal services performed in 2017. And he personally signed checks for payments to Michael Cohen for each of these 9 months. In total, the grand jury found there were 34 documents with this critical false statement. Why did Donald Trump repeatedly make these false statements? The evidence will show that he did so to cover up crimes relating to the 2016 election. Donald Trump, executives at the publishing company American Media Incorporated, Mr. Cohen, and others agreed in 2015 to a catch and kill scheme. That is, a scheme to buy and suppress negative information to help Mr. Trump's chance of winning the election. As part of this scheme, Donald Trump and others made 3 payments to people who claimed to have negative information about Mr. Trump. To make these payments, they set up shell companies, and they made yet more false statements, including, for example, in AMI, American Media Incorporated's business records. One of the 3 people that they paid to keep quiet was a woman named Stormy Daniels. Less than 2 weeks before the presidential election, Michael Cohen wired $130,000 to Stormy Daniels' lawyer. That payment was to hide damaging information from the voting public. The participant scheme was illegal. The scheme violated New York election law, which makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. The $130,000 wire payment exceeded the federal campaign contribution cap, and the false statements in AMI's books violated New York law. That is why Mr. Trump made false statements about his payments to Mr. Cohen. He could not simply say that the payments were a reimbursement for Mr. Cohen's payments to Stormy Daniels. To do so, to make that true statement, would have been to admit a crime. So instead, Mr. Trump said that he was paying Mr. Cohen for fictitious legal services in 2017 to cover up actual crime committed the prior year. And in order to get Michael Cohen his money back, they planned one last false statement. In order to complete the scheme, they planned to mischaracterize the repayments to Mr. Cohen as income to the New York State tax authorities. The conduct I just described, and that which was charged by the grand jury, is felony criminal conduct in New York State. True and accurate business records are important everywhere, to be sure. They are all the more important in Manhattan, the financial center of the world. That is why we have a history in the Manhattan DA's office of vigorously enforcing white-collar crime. My office, including the talented prosecutors you saw at arraignment earlier today, has charged hundreds of felony falsifying business records. This charge, it can be said, is the bread and butter of our white-collar work. And fraud presents itself in all different forms here in Manhattan. We have charged falsifying business records for those who violated federal bank secrecy laws. We have charged falsifying business records for those who were seeking to cover up sex crimes. And we have brought this charge for those who committed tax violations. At its core, this case today is one with allegations like so many of our white-collar cases. Allegations that someone lied again and again to protect their interests and evade the laws to which we are all held accountable. As this office has done time and time again, we today uphold our solemn responsibility to ensure that everyone stands equal before the law. No amount of money and no amount of power changes that enduring American principle. I'll now take questions.
Excuse me, so we're going to take a limited number of follow-up questions, one question per reporter. I will call on you, and again, we have limited time. Thank you. The first question will be Brett.
Thank you. Richard versus CNN. Why now? I mean, some argue that this is a political move. You're not going to be a political person. The birthdays are going to go into the next, political season. Why now?
We conducted a thorough and rigorous investigation, as we're known to do, at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I've been doing this for 24 years, and I'm no stranger to rigorous, complex investigations. I bring cases when they're ready. Having now conducted a rigorous, thorough investigation, the case was ready to be brought, and it was brought.
Thank you. Mr. Bragg, the indictment says that there were 34 false business records. And they were done to conceal another crime, but the indictment does not specifically say what those crimes were. We are assuming, perhaps, that they might be election-related. I'm wondering if you can specify what laws were also broken.
All right. So let me say as an initial matter, the indictment doesn't specify that because the law does not so require. In my remarks, I mentioned a couple of laws, which I will highlight again now. The first is New York State election law, which makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. I further indicated a number of unlawful means, including more additional false statements, including statements that were planned to be made to tax authorities. I also noted the federal election law cap on contribution limits.
But why weren't there those crimes charged? Why wasn't he charged with those crimes?
Well, I'm not going to go into our deliberative process on what was brought. The charges that were brought were the ones that were brought. The evidence in the law is the basis for those decisions.
You had expressed a year ago that you had some reservations about the case's readiness. Can you talk to us about what were some of the questions in your mind that needed to be answered in order to bring a case of this magnitude?
I'm not going to go chapter and verse into any thinking. What I will say is, I believe the time period you're talking about, I've been in office for a couple of months. The investigation, in my view, was not concluded into the conduct in particular that is the basis for the charges today. Since that time, we've had more evidence made available to the office and opportunity to meet with additional witnesses. So as I said earlier, I've been doing this for 24 years. I don't bring cases prior to a thorough and rigorous investigation. Now, having done so, the case has been brought.
Bragg, David Pecker, ABC News. Your predecessor took a hard look at this case and decided not to charge it. Federal prosecutors took a hard look at this case and decided not to charge it. Do you believe you have new evidence that led you to decide to charge this, or why now?
Well, as I just mentioned, we have had available to the office additional evidence that was not in the office's possession prior to my time here. And as to your part of your question about the federal, we have a distinct and strong, I would say profound, independent interest in New York State. This is the business capital of the world. We regularly do cases involving false business statements. The bedrock, in fact, the basis for business integrity and a well-functioning business marketplace is true and accurate record keeping. That's the charge that's brought here, falsifying New York State business records.
We're going to take a few more. Yep.
Thank you. DA Bragg, I'm just going to read back one line from your statement of facts. The participants also took steps that mischaracterized for tax purposes the true nature of payments and furtherance of the scheme. Do you allege former President Trump was one of the participants who mischaracterized the payments for tax purposes?
I'm not going to go beyond the plain language statement of facts, which I think speaks for itself.
Shana?
Hey, Brett, can you please comment on the strength of the evidence that Trump personally intended to violate state election law, including actions that are charged in the indictment?
So the charge is falsifying business records. The charge requires, as I specified, criminal conduct that was concealed. One of the concealed crimes we allege is New York State election law. I went through in our statement of facts, which I think many of you have in front of you, goes through things including, text messages, emails, contemporaneous phone records, multiple witnesses. All of that will be, as you saw in the fall, borne out in a public courtroom in downtown Manhattan.
Last question is Jonah.
So, David Bragg, the charges related to the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels, the release from your office also mentions another woman, Karen McDougal, as well as a doorman. Can you comment on how those players are related to the charges you've brought, or to the case overall?
I'm glad you put your finger on that, because it's not just about one payment. It is 34 business records, 34 false statements in business records that were concealing criminal conduct. And the earlier question about New York State election law, when I talked about conspiracy to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. Those unlawful means, we allege, include the conduct set forth in the statement of facts, which is additional false statements separate and apart from the charged ones in AMI documents, planned false statements to taxing authorities. It is not just that one $130,000 wire payment. Thanks so much.
Any comment about any incitement of violence?
We'll see if he takes any more questions. He does not appear to be willing to. That's Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney today, who took the unprecedented step of criminally charging a president, former or current. This is the first time we've ever seen this in U.S. history. Obviously, you've heard that many times as we've reported on this, but it did play out this afternoon in Manhattan Criminal Court. Alvin Bragg pressed repeatedly, why now? Why these charges? He said he's been at this, a prosecutor in many different titles, capacities for 24 years, no stranger to cases that take a long time to bear out. He said, I bring them when they're ready. In breaking down why, there were 34 felony counts of falsifying business records and nothing in addition to that. He said that these are felonies and not just misdemeanors because they were meant to conceal other crimes. And he said there were two laws that I cited when pressed by reporters there. He said first was a New York State election law, which makes it a crime to have a falsified business record to help a candidacy. That would be to conceal the other crime, to help a candidacy by unlawful means. And he said, secondly, federal election law contribution limits, obviously those alleged payments out to Stormy Daniels, et cetera, the two other payments mentioned in this indictment, well above contribution limits at the federal level. He said these 34 falsified business records concealed other crimes, and that essentially it speaks for itself. Now, on the question of why now, because you've heard a lot of this, particularly from Republican supporters of Donald Trump, and it's a legitimate question to ask, why now as we now gear up for another presidential election? Alvin Bragg said, and I think this is key here, and whether it bears out, this is what we'll continue to press on as reporters here moving forward. But he said there is more evidence in hand now that he is the DA than what the previous Manhattan DA had in hand. Now, whether or not that's the David Pecker of this all, the owner of the National Enquirer, or it's another piece of crucial evidence here. Again, we're going to know that in the coming days and weeks. It would seem that David Pecker is playing a significant role in this indictment, this catch and kill scheme that is laid out in great detail, the alleged catch and kill scheme that Alvin Bragg says was concealed by falsifying these business records. So Dan Abrams, Kate Shaw, first I want to get your reaction from both of you. You said he would take questions, weren't sure if he would, hoped that he would. He did. Did he adequately answer the question of why now?
Well, if he can demonstrate that there was significant additional evidence that came forward that wasn't available before, that's certainly an argument to make. Now, it's interesting to think about the timing. David Pecker went into the grand jury after Robert Costello went into the grand jury. Remember, he was an attorney who had worked with Michael Cohen, who went in and blasted Michael Cohen. The Trump team had asked him to testify. He came in and said, Michael Cohen's not credible. Can't believe anything he says. David Pecker comes in after that point to testify, to effectively rebut Michael Cohen. Did they have David Pecker in their hands before that happened? Was this a new revelation to them after? Did they start having questions about the case? These are all things we don't know the answers to, but very important questions. So we'll see. It's still a little vague here as to exactly how they're going to enhance it from a misdemeanor to a felony. And that's the single most important question here. Because if this defense team is able to somehow get the felonies eliminated, if they're able to argue that they have not made a sufficient case to elevate it to a felony, you do then get into statute of limitations problems on a misdemeanor, which is only 2 years. And there are all sorts of rules and regulations around that, but the felonies are what give you 5 years. And there are extensions beyond that. But that's a very important legal argument that is still to come in this case. Still a lot we don't know.
Yeah, and this connection, Kate, the other part of the question, not simply just why now, but how do you make falsifying business records a felony? And he says it's clear in the indictment why we've done that.
Right, we've tied it, he says, to election integrity. This scheme, this conspiracy was about essentially inducing a fraud of some sort, right? Convincing the public to vote a particular way in a presidential election. I thought Bragg actually was quite effective here. I think he was kind of addressing critics who have said, this is kind of a small bore. This isn't as important. This is hush money payments. There are other investigations that are more significant. He really struck two notes. This is about financial integrity in the financial capital of the world and election integrity in the context of a presidential election. Those are high stakes matters, and that's what he said this case is about.
And again, he tried to make the case right there, and obviously he's going to do a much more extensive job of trying to make his case than just a couple of questions from the media there, that the falsification of business records concealed another crime, which was, in his words, he's alleging here the catch and kill scheme to protect a candidate, particularly in those final months leading up to the election. Pierre, you were talking about something else that struck a chord with you, and that's where the American people come into all this, the voters who were trying to make up their minds in an election where many believed they weren't happy with really either candidate.
I took particular note of what the district attorney said when he said, quote, "This is about an effort to hide damaging information from the voting public." That's the heart of what this catch and kill scheme was about, according to the district attorney. And again, he's essentially saying that the campaign finance laws of this country, both state and federal, matter. And what the scheme was about was to create the aura that Donald Trump was a viable candidate who did not have this baggage. And the idea is that this baggage would have somehow damaged the campaign to the point where he might not have been able to win. And he's saying that Donald Trump was a direct participant with Michael Cohen and the publisher of the National Enquirer to get this done.
John Carl, what did you make of the case he made here?
Well, I think this is going to play out against a political background and a deeply divided country where a good chunk of our nation believes that this is entirely politically motivated. But, you know, he's made the case that this was an effort effectively to help his campaign and to hide the fact that it was done to help his campaign. I mean, it's going to be tough to make the case to that segment of this country, a big segment of the country, a segment not just hardcore Trump supporters, but perhaps some who don't support Trump, that this case is political.
And it's always important to remember, Terry Moran, that there were jurors before this grand jury who came up with allowing the DA to move forward with this indictment. And now there'll be jurors, if this goes to trial, who listen to this. And when you hear him describe this alleged catch and kill scheme, that's something that people can understand. It's not a leap to understand if you got something labeled one way and then you find out the money actually paid allegedly to catch and kill a story and to bury it. That would seem to be something, and we've reported on it often here, that people can at least understand. They can make their own judgment on the backside, but at least it's a scheme that it would seem they would be able to make the case and then let them decide whether or not it was a crime.
Oh, they'll understand it. I don't think there's any question about that, David, especially given the underlying tawdry facts. They'll lean in to the narrative and to the structure. The question is, can the DA prove that it is a violation of the law? And I think what we're about to embark on now is so critical in relation to what Jonathan Karl just said. Look, this is pouring gasoline on the raging fires of political polarization in this country. Alvin Bragg, the district attorney, has taken on a lot. And so how this case proceeds legally, how does he answer and get around the notion that statute of limitations has told under normal circumstances on these charges? He can. There are ways of doing it. But will that further fuel, you know, a sense that this is a gotcha, go get 'em case, a fundamental violation of Americans' sense of fairness in how prosecution should proceed. And I do think that so much rests now on people seeing the rule of law at work. They'll have arguments at every stage. The jurors, as you point out, they'll understand the narrative and they will have to weigh, whether or not this rises to the level of criminal activity that Alvin Bragg has charged. In the John Edwards case, which while not precisely on point is similar, the jurors decided that what John Edwards did was wrong. There are a lot of wrong things you can do in an election. There are a lot of things you can try to keep from the voters to protect your position in an election that aren't criminal. And that will be the heart of this case.
Terry Moran, our thanks to you. With just a few moments left here, I want to get a few more opinions before we go off the air and push this forward to new reporting about what we could expect later tonight once the former president's back at Mar-a-Lago. But first to you, former Governor Christie, former prosecutor as well. You heard Alvin Bragg. You were sitting here as part of this coverage with us. Listen, he said here that I take cases, I can bring them when they're ready. He also revealed that we had more in hand than the previous DA had. What did you make of that?
Well, on the first one, that's a standard prosecutorial line. They give that to you in the handbook when you get sworn in as a prosecutor. And so I was not surprised to hear him say that. And I don't think it has much import one way or another. On the fact that, on everything else he said, this better not be his best day. When you bring an indictment, you've got nobody pushing back against you. Nobody in the grand jury is pushing back against you. Defendants or witnesses are not allowed to have lawyers present. You get to present your case absolutely unobstructed. Well, that's not the way it's going to be from here forward. So the challenge for Bragg is going to be, this better not be his best day. He better have a lot of other really good days in the courtroom. And I think one thing we've got to look to is, what else does Pecker have beside just his conversations with Trump as alleged in the indictment? Does he have documents? Does he have emails or text messages which confirm certain things? Are there possibly tape recordings? I mean, all of those are things that may in fact exist. And so we've got to see what's the quality of the proof. But for Alvin Bragg today, he better hope today wasn't his best day. He better have a lot of good days going forward, because it will now be hotly contested in the courtroom and in the court of public opinion.
No question about that. Governor Christie, our thanks to you as always. Heidi Heitkamp, what did you make of what Alvin Bragg just laid out?
Well, I think he wanted to make the point that New York is the financial capital. We bring these cases all the time. To not bring against Donald Trump would not be consistent with what we think we need to do to protect business records. And so blah, 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 right? But the real challenge here for Donald Trump is, what's next? What about the documents case in Mar-a-Lago? What about the special prosecutor? What about the case in Georgia? And so we're just one day into this on this case, but you've got to look at it kind of overall. We've been tracking a number of independents on social media in an organization that I head up, and I will tell you, looking at the indictment, since the indictment, there has been a lot of mega stories about this is horrible, it's all political. The independents are like, yeah, here we go again. With this guy, there's nothing but chaos, and we're tired of it. And so I think we've got to be a little careful, because we're only one day into it. We're going to know more in a couple months on how politically people are going to react to this, and it's going to be in the context of additional investigations terminating.
There's no way. Thank you, Heidi. There's no way to escape that we're in the middle of a campaign season. The race for the White House underway again. President Biden has not declared that he's running again, but he said in an interview with me that he has every intention to do so. Respect your fate, but every intention to do so. And he's very much acting like the candidate out in the trail. And it was an interesting sort of split screen in the last 24 hours with him in Minneapolis talking about jobs at a manufacturing facility. Let's bring in Mary Bruce, because what was also key here, Mary, was the president addressed this for the first time, expressing his trust in the legal system and his trust in the NYPD. And they, of course, did do a good job today keeping the city and the former president safe, too.
And beyond that, David, this president really does not want to talk about this. He did weigh in briefly yesterday, as you noted, reinstating and reassuring everyone of his faith in the legal system, his faith in the NYPD to handle any unrest today. But Biden has not commented on the specifics of this, and he hasn't taken the opportunity to attack Trump in any way, which may at face value seem a bit unusual, since Trump and Biden are likely, it seems, to go head to head in the next presidential race. But Biden, for one, is someone who takes very seriously the independence of the judiciary, but he also wants to draw a very clear contrast between the drama surrounding the former president and the work that the current president is doing. So this White House, instead of commenting, instead of going into a tit for tat with Donald Trump, is trying to project that Joe Biden is doing the work. They are trying to highlight his agenda this week, even though they know they certainly are going to have a very hard time getting that messaging through. For now, they are happy to have Donald Trump and the drama surrounding him soaking up much of the oxygen, David.
Mary Bruce Lab at the White House. Mary, thank you. And as we saw that image play out just moments ago, Donald Trump's plane taking off from LaGuardia, heading back to Mar-a-Lago, a couple of hours in the air before he lands there. I wanted to ask John Santucci, as we look at this image, John, we know that he has prepared a statement for tonight, that his team was helping him to work on this. The question is whether or not any of this will be revised, how harshly he'll go at the prosecutor in this case. That is not much of a question here, I don't think, among the team with me at the desk. How will he continue to go after the judge, and how careful he'll be with his message moving forward, or if this, in fact, becomes the message in his campaign?
Well, David, my understanding as of right now is that the former president is, as you say, on the plane. He is watching coverage. I'm told that they are going through the speech for tonight, making some tweaks, changing some language. Nothing to say that relates to any comments by the judge, but, Donald Trump is always working on whatever he is going to say, and sometimes, as we know, we'll ad-lib it in real time. Look, David, I've spoken to multiple people that have been around the former president in just the last couple of minutes here since leaving court and heading back to LaGuardia. Angry is one of the words I've gotten from several people. They are calming him down. He is calm. Resolute is another word that has been written to me by an aide. But the reality is right now, David, is that Donald Trump does need to take this seriously. And that is one thing that several advisors and allies of his are writing to me in real time, that just pause for a minute, and then calm down. Let's see what tonight brings.
John Santucci, thank you. And John Carl, really important night for him.
Yeah, and a very important statement that we've just gotten. This is from Mitt Romney, who is perhaps more than any prominent Republican other than Liz Cheney been a critic of Donald Trump, the only senator who has voted in 2 separate impeachment trials to convict Donald Trump, commenting on this by starting out by saying, "I believe President Trump's character and conduct make him unfit for office." That part's not a surprise. But then he says, "Even so, I believe the New York prosecutor has stretched to reach felony criminal charges in order to fit a political agenda. No one is above the law, not even former presidents, but everybody is entitled to equal treatment under the law." And he says that this prosecutor's overreach sets a dangerous precedent for criminalizing political differences. So that's from a prominent critic of Donald Trump saying that this case just doesn't sound right. I think you're going to hear more of that in the coming days.
Joining other Republicans who predicted this.
And perhaps some Democrats, too.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, John. And I wanted to, in closing here, do both ends of this journey. Aaron Katersky, who's at the courthouse. In a moment, we'll go to Rachel Scott, who's standing by at Mar-a-Lago, because I think another important part of this story is that there had been significant concern on the part of law enforcement and authorities about the incitement of crowds. And I think that we can all, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but there is some relief that the calls for, protests that could get beyond what the authorities would want to see have not played out. And Aaron Katersky, perhaps you could speak to that here in New York, both at Trump Tower and down there at the courthouse. The NYPD, the Secret Service really deserves some credit here.
They do, David, and they were prepared for the worst. They heard the increasingly violent rhetoric coming from social media corners associated with the former president's indictment. They heard some of former President Trump's own hostile rhetoric on social media, and they were prepared for anything. And there are still some people shouting in the park right here across from the courthouse, but nothing like the large-scale protest that perhaps former President Trump had in mind ended up materializing, either at Trump Tower, where there were mainly curious tourists, or down here at court. Finally, those either critics or supporters of the district attorney at least understand what it is that he's actually doing here. Prosecutors described, but did not charge, a conspiracy to violate both state election law and tax law when they say the former president allegedly falsified business records. And it was notable, I think, David, that in each of those charges, all 34 of them to which the former president pleaded not guilty, the prosecutor said he had intent to defraud. But the indictment does not specify who was defrauded, but an accompanying statement of facts does. It says that it's the 2016 voters in the presidential election, and any trial here, David, could fall in the middle of the 2024 presidential election. David.
Aaron Katursky at Criminal Court in Lower Manhattan. Aaron, thank you. And a quick point from Rachel Scott before we go, because Rachel, I know you're standing by. You're at the other end of this journey. We see the plane headed towards Florida to Mar-a-Lago. He expects to appear right in that room with you tonight before a group of supporters, a much different environment than what we watched transpire at Criminal Court today. And the question is, how far will he take it? Will he lean in? And does this essentially become his campaign now?
David, the lines now are certainly blurred. And when the former president touches down right here in Florida, the focus does turn to 2024. So much of the speech, so much of his remarks today were in flux, primarily because Trump had no idea what exactly he would be charged with. They are on the plane right now with his advisors. They're revising this speech, but they have been close on this all week, talking about ways to turn this into a political advantage. Bottom line, David, the tone has been set, and it is a tone of defiance. It was set when the former president called the central issue of our time the weaponization of the justice system. It was set when the former president said he would not step down or step aside from running for president in 2024 despite this indictment. In fact, he is fundraising off of it. The former president now not only the leading Republican candidate, but also a criminal defendant, David.
Rachel Scott in Mar-a-Lago tonight. Rachel, thank you. Our coverage is going to continue here, ABC News Live, abcnews.com. We're going to leave you here with the images of an extraordinary and history-making day. Day beginning, of course, with the former president leaving Trump Tower. There was that moment, very quick, but held his fist up to the crowd on his way to the courthouse. There he is, arriving in Lower Manhattan, sitting in court, pleading not guilty, in his own words, standing before the judge, 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. Then, of course, boarding that plane that bears his name, making the journey home to Mar-a-Lago, where he will be before cameras, reporters again this evening, expected to give his reaction. And with him running for president and leading on the Republican side, many expect that he will lean in on this day. I'll be back with the entire team for World News Tonight. I'm David Muir in New York, and I really do thank you and the entire team here for their really careful and steady reporting. We'll continue to press all the questions on all sides of this. And I'll see you for World News a short time from now. Good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Okay, good. Thanks, Dante.
Yeah. So I really want to say that I'm so sorry that if I muddied up your relationship with Dante, because I'm so happy for you, Sam. I'm happy for you and for Dante, and that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. I mean, you still are family, Drew.